Lesson 22, Pythagorean Theorem. Example 1. Use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the missing measures. In this right triangle, we have legs that are 12 and 16, and a hypotenuse, which is C. Remember, the legs are the shorter sides of a right triangle, and the hypotenuse is the longest side. So we're going to use Pythagorean Theorem to solve this. Remember, it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're going to substitute a, b, and c into this equation to solve it. And since the smaller sides are 12 and 16, we're going to plug those in for a and b, and we're going to solve for c, which is the longest side. So when I do that, I should get 12 squared plus 16 squared equals c squared. Remember, 12 times 12 is 144, and 16 times 16 is 256. So I should get 144 plus 256 is c squared. 144 plus 256 is 400, so I'm going to get 400 equals c squared. Now I have to get the c by itself, so that means I have to undo the squaring of c, and the inverse operation of that is square rooting. So I have to square root both sides, and I get the square root of 400 equals the square root of c squared. So I've got to find a number times itself, that's 400, and that's 20. 20 times 20 is 400. So the square root of 400 will be 20. And the square root of c squared, since they undo themselves, would be c. So my answer is going to be 20 centimeters equals c. Don't forget your units. So the hypotenuse of this missing triangle, side of the triangle, is 20 centimeters. And again, it's the longest side, and it's called the hypotenuse. Example 2. Use the Pythagorean Theorem to find the missing measure. In this right triangle, the legs are b and 5 centimeters, and the hypotenuse, which is the longest side, is 13 centimeters. An easy way for figuring out where the hypotenuse is, it's always opposite of the right angle. We solve this again using Pythagorean Theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And then I substitute in a, b, and c. So remember, a and b's are the legs. So a is going to be 5, b is what we're trying to solve for, and of course the hypotenuse is c. So c is 13. So when I plug those in, I get 5 squared plus b squared equals 13 squared. 5 times 5 is 25, and 13 times 13 is 169. So I should get the equation 25 plus b squared equals 169. Remember, now we're trying to get the b squared by itself, so I have to use the inverse operation to get rid of the 25, which means I'm going to subtract 25. And if I'm going to do it to one side, I have to do it to the other side. That's what the property of equality says. So I have to subtract 25 from both sides. The 25 minus 25 is 0, so they cancel out. On the left side, I'm going to be left with b squared. And 169 minus 25 is 144. So I'm going to get b squared equals 144. Again, I'm trying to get b, so I have to undo the squaring. The inverse operation of squaring is square rooting. So I'm going to have to square root both sides, and that'll get me the square root of b squared equals the square root of 144. So the square root of b squared is b, and the square root of 144 is 12, because 12 times 12 is 144. So my answer is going to be b equals 12 centimeters. So The missing leg is 12 centimeters long. Don't forget your units. Sentence frame, Pythagorean Theorem. Blank squared plus blank squared equals blank squared. So you're going to fill in the missing blanks to form the Pythagorean Theorem. They should be variables. Second sentence frame. If the two sides of a right triangle measure blank and blank, then the hypotenuse of the right triangle measures blank. So the first two blanks are numbers for the legs of the right triangle, and the third blank is a number for the hypotenuse, the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle. And it should work. So a squared plus b squared should equal c squared. When those three numbers work, it's also called a Pythagorean triple. Sentence frame 3 for Pythagorean Theorem. A triangle whose sides measure blank, blank, and blank cannot be a right triangle because blank squared plus blank squared does not equal blank squared. So in this case, the first, second, and third blanks are going to consist of numbers that won't form a right triangle, which means that the first leg squared plus the second leg squared is not going to equal to the hypotenuse squared.